Okay, welcome to the Greenleaf podcast. Today we have three usual guys that are up here, and we have Brian Johnson. Thank you very much for joining us with the city of Peachtree Corners. So, you are the city manager, right? So we were talking about, like, what does that mean compared to other cities and what the, mayors that have more or less involvement in how things run, but you're in charge of the whole thing.
Well, I mean, I was hired and work for the 7 members of city council, one of which is the mayor. He would be the, chief elected
you have
official.
7 bosses?
I have a 7-headed boss.
That's fun.
I work for them all equally.
Wow.
And, no one of them has more. So,
Do you do 7 quarterly performance reviews?
No, they do it all at once.
That's at least good.
But, it is interesting. The saying goes is I only have to be able to count to 4 at any one point.
There you go.
Our form of government, the most popular form of government of cities in the U.S., of cities that are around 15,000 to 250,000, is a model after the corporate America, which is the board of directors, of which case is our city council. Mayor is the chairman of the board, and they hire a CEO to run the city underneath the policies they set forth, the budgets that they approve. They're part-time. They don't meet all the time, and my job is to run the day-to-day stuff for them. And so, that's how we're set up. There's, I would say most really large cities have what most people would think of when they see the mayor doing a lot of stuff is the strong mayor form of government, where the mayor, when is elected, they become full-time chief executive, and they're not a part of those city councils. So in our case, the mayor and I work extremely well because he is, I think it's fair to say, a man of the people. He is really out in the community as a great finger on the pulse of what important to the community. He's really good at, going to events, showing the flag, and that's all fine. I have to do some of that, but, I've got the responsibilities back at City Hall, and so he saves me from doing too many ribbon cuttings or whatever, and hopefully he would, I would hope he would be able to say I save him from any of the, administrative headaches that you have back at City Hall where, you're doing the fun stuff like, reviewing contracts or firing people or, those kind of things.
Well, so you also do something very important that people may not realize, but you are the police department. How does the police department fall?
Well, I mean, as we speak today, early May, we are getting ready to kick off really a summer's long community dialogue on whether or not we want to terminate our intergovernmental agreement with Gwinnett County,
right,
and stand up our own police department. And so,
because that's the unique about because most other cities around you have actually formed their own police department.
Even the new cities that, Sandy Springs kind of was the first new city in Georgia that had been created, back in 2005. At that time, I don't think there had been a city in 30, 40 years that had a new one. And that kind of kicked off a series of new city, and, Peachtree Corners was in that, that phase of new cities. And most of those new cities at some point, it could have been early on, the citizens wanted it, but some have done what we have done, and that is they started off retaining oftentimes the county as they were doing it. They said, we'll come up with an agreement for you, the county, to continue to provide police like you did before we became a city. But most of those cities now have their own police department. And oftentimes it comes down to the citizenry wanting more attention, more focused, policing, a better knowledge of the community, where crime is, than you get when you have a county level police that has a bigger jurisdiction. The downside is usually comes down to this.
Right.
So that's what the community has to weigh is, whether it's worth paying a little bit more to have a larger department just focused on the city, or they're okay with the way things are. And so big decision, probably the biggest decision this community has made since they decided to have the referendum to create a city.
And I do remember when Dunwoody was formed. I mean, police was the actual one of the biggest issues because DeKalb County, Dunwoody's on the edge of DeKalb County, and so the DeKalb County police serving Dunwoody was always a challenge. There was a precinct there, but it never seemed to be at the level of service people expected. And when Dunwoody was formed, I mean, everybody knows who the police officers are. People know the police officers by name. Everybody knows the chief, and it's just part of the community now that we know we have our own local police, and it's just they're not like a foreign entity just serving the community, and so it's a lot different experience.
It is, and we're very similar in where we are that Dunwoody was when they made the decision. We are at the very far southwestern edge of Gwinnett, and we're in a precinct that the precinct itself actually isn't even in Peachtree Corners. We comprise about half of West Precinct, but more than 80% of the crime that happens in West Precinct happens outside of our city limits. So we're running into a situation where Gwinnett police officers are getting pulled from patrolling what
Your
we
area.
expect
Right.
to be here to areas. And I get it. Gwinnett is in you got to move resources where the need is. So it's nothing against them. They're chronically understaffed. I think they're 200 to 250 authorized positions below what they could have filled. I mean, and when that happens, the county's growing. Crime goes up when more people move somewhere, and so that's where we're at. The question is going to be: does the community want to pay a little bit more for it, or are they going to just be like, you know what, we're good? So
every mayor we've had on there too, that's one of the biggest conversations, that they have to be competitive paying their police officers, and so they have to draw police officers in, which means they have to pay them just a little bit more, and so there becomes this fight about police officers and where they're going to go and which precinct they're going to be in. Honestly, and they want to go to the I don't want to say the easier job, but the job that's a little bit more predictable and actually more localized too, because if you're just in one community and you know that community, it's a lot easier for you to be effective there rather than spread out over this big area.
Absolutely is. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a big decision, but, it's, the issue is it comes down to most, local government and governing bodies, rightly so, and we're no exception, believe that public safety, having a safe environment for commerce to take place, for investment to be had, for people to live, work, learn, and play, is the single most important service that a city. I mean, they're all important, but that you get nothing if it's unsafe.
Right, that's what people think of first.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's also the most complicated department
And expensive.
and expensive
Yes.
department. And so that's as a city manager, it would be actually way easier if we continued to get our police service through that intergovernmental agreement, because I don't have the headaches of filling position, recruitment, retention, all that stuff. But the community will be the one who, through their elected officials, kind of tell us where they feel things are. So
I'll advocate for a raise for you if you get a police department. Okay.
I just need you to add more hours in the day.
Okay.
That would actually be helpful
all right.
too. So, yeah.
Well, we think about, right now, kind of nationwide, there's a lot of push of one with Doge of like, what is happening in government efficiency, or how can we do this stuff, anything that's happening, even corporate America, more efficiently and more cost effectively. So when you're looking at making those decisions, it translates on the real estate investment side to either increases in property taxes, but you could also not spend money. It could be increases in insurances. Insurance normally goes up when there's things that don't go so well in an area repeatedly. And that means, hey, maybe you don't need any police, but everyone's got to pay a boatload for insurance. Or you can have lots of police, maybe property taxes are higher, but your insurance is going to be a lot lower. It's like, how do you judge that when you're coming in, like you're running an organization that's still relatively new? There's segments of the organization that you're assessing. Do we set these up or not set these up? we look at that running a business, all the time as well. Is this something we bring in-house, or do we use outside, people to execute that part? How, when you're looking at that in your shoes, there's got to be stuff every time you're like, hey, should we do this internally or should we do this externally? And how do we do it efficiently?
Well, great questions. I mean, I'll start by saying, unlike the federal government, one thing that does help with efficiency, it doesn't ensure it, but does help is, we have to have a balanced budget every year. So, we don't get to print more money.
You can't just print more.
Right.
No.
You have no choice but to be efficient. I mean, how many employees?
degree.
How many employees do you have?
Well, in our case, if you are only talking about actual city employees, despite the fact that there's a couple hundred people providing service on behalf of the city, we only have
Mowing
about
lawns,
32.
cutting hedges. So 32. So his
Because we outsource public works, we outsource code enforcement. We have a lot of outsourcing. So they're not city employees. They are providing the service.
But even all the street and cleaning of the side of the road,
Drainage,
you could do that
yes.
internally or externally. That's a decision that's got to be made.
right.
Like, how do you do it?
But I mean, just by the very nature of you have to have a zero budget at the end of the year. It forces you to have some efficiency in there and making sure you're making the right choices because, first of all, you just don't have a choice.
That's true.
I mean, you don't have a choice.
But some cities could just raise property taxes.
They
Then you
could
do have
raise
a
property
choice.
taxes, but property taxes also you have to
That's fine.
They have to raise the value of the well, you could sort of raise property taxes sort of underhandedly by raising property values, or you actually change millage rates. So you can do both levers.
I would say so, this is a generalization, but you're going to generally see this to be the case. If you outsource something, let's say street maintenance, which we currently do, company called Optech we use, and they provide us per the contract, I can't remember how many employees, 40, 50, whatever, and the vehicles, and they're going out doing exactly what other public works departments are doing to maintain streets. If you outsource it, it's generally a little bit, more cost effective. We're not having to hold, medical and, retirement and unemployment insurance
Manage
on
vehicles,
employees.
manage
We're
a
not
fleet.
having to manage a fleet. Now, they build a lot of it in, but there's a little bit of the cost savings there. So it's a little bit more of a cost-effective way. What you give up is control, especially the ability to flex what you're working on very quickly or to surge. That's tend to be what you give up. Now, what regulates that at the local level? Where do you cross that threshold from cost efficiency is the more important of the two factors, or the control of making sure that your police officers are concentrating on the areas that you want them to concentrate on, and you get to control it like that versus reaching up through multiple
You got to call the
levels of
manager, who calls the
government
manager, who
and,
calls the
all
team.
that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Where you tend to cross that threshold is really where the community comes in, and why at the local level, where that really means is, Josh could be going home after this podcast, and he's, wife tells you to swing by and pick up some milk at Ingles. You could easily run in to one of current council members, who live in this area right there. They would know him. He would probably know them. Even if he didn't and you recognize them and they didn't, you still have an opportunity to say, hey, council member, whatever, or mayor, whatever, can I ask you a question or whatever? You have access to them, and they know that. And so they're much more accountable to the people. And as you move up in government, you may want to be accountable, but you start representing such sheer numbers of people that rarely is somebody even know who you are, let alone for them to, here you got each council member is representing, what do we have, about 50,000 people, and we have 4 at large, So they're representing 50. The 3 district ones are, 15, 17,000. County Commission, Gwinnett, has 5 commissioners. 4 of them are a specific area. Million people here, they're representing 250,000.
Right.
When you
Exponentially
are having to
large,
do
yeah.
it, makes a difference. It makes a difference when you're elected and you're like, I'm going to run into constituents in the grocery store. So as a result, they tend to want to, need to, and be inclined to make decisions after they have received input from the community, because they know that if they ended up making a, call it a, executive decision on how they're going to vote without really getting that, you could be upset, and you see them in Ingalls and you give them an earful. And not only an earful, but, this November they could be up for re-election and you're like, I'm going to support somebody else, or I'm going to run for office myself. That's where, so when you make that, it generally only happens when the community is pretty clear about doing it. And they do it going in with their eyes wide open. Speaking of police, there will be about a $70 per year average increase in property tax if we stand up a police department here versus what is being paid. We're actually allowing Gwinnett to charge a millage rate for the police, 2.9 mils. We would need to go up to about 3.5 mils for us to do it in-house. We don't have the economy of scale
To take over the full budget and
to
do all the
take over
moving
the whole
parts.
thing. So the average increase for the homeowner here will be about $70 a year. As a homeowner, I show you, all right, I can provide about double the amount of officers per shift. They are only patrolling the city limits. They're not ever leaving. Local control, all that kind of stuff.
No
and
vacations.
That's the upside. The downside is it will cost you a little bit more money. We won't have access to certain specialized units internally like Gwinnett
Like your
does,
SWAT
like
and-
SWAT and gang unit or aviation assets. Now, our argument here is we don't need those very often. So, we're paying for them all the time. There are other.
Would you still get those from,
We could
like,
absolutely.
you could call in?
You get mutual aid agreements. There's other. Georgia Highway Patrol has some of it. There's
you
other.
just call your old war buddies and just suit up.
Correct, and
You'd be
we'll just suit
I've been
back
waiting
up.
for this call.
We'll just suit
That'd be awesome.
I've got the trunk under my bed.
You're
with
ready.
all my old.
Does your uniform still fit you? That's the more.
Doubtful.
Doubtful,
I might
okay.
not be able to get the top button. But
Does this look good, honey? Looks
Does it
great.
still fit? Am I okay?
You look good. You look good.
Adorable.
But yeah, that's what these things, whether it's police, question here or other stuff, that's really where. And if a resident goes in and is like, I'm okay with paying more for a higher level of service, that's generally where you see that threshold cross. So that's why on the efficiency side, if it was pure efficiency, you would almost outsource everything. The private sector, maybe the exception of police and fire, and there are still some private fire departments. You can't have private police in the U.S., but beyond that, most of the time the private sector can do.
They're going to get that.
Yes,
if
they
it's
can do a
purely
little bit
based on
better
like.
if it's purely better. But also, oftentimes the community is like, that particular service is more important to us for us to have control, for our elected officials to be able to really control what we do, and it's worth a little bit more money. That's generally, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes, city officials can make, shoot first and aim later. There could be a little bit of that happens. So I don't want to sit here and say that, it doesn't. But that's generally.
I was going to say, this is really similar to kind of how we operate our real estate business. Is, when we started doing this by necessity, we were the operator of everything we had, and then as we continue to grow, like, man, would this be more efficient to scale with a third-party management company, outsource it, because they have more resources, they have more scalability, they can flex in and out of properties as we buy them. And so we evaluated this, especially as we went out of state. And what we realized is we didn't have the accountability, we didn't have the control of the properties, we didn't have the control of what was going on to our residents and to our investors. So at both sides. And ultimately we said, like, listen, no, we are owner operators. We've always been owner operators. And that's what we need to focus on, is scaling the management company and operating our assets. So no, we're not the cheapest management company, right? But we have complete control of everything that's going on.
I was going to say, and I would imagine that there are or will be instances where it might be that you have a property that is not requiring a lot of attention, and on a case-by-case basis, you still might find one that it's like, you know what, this is one where it's just humming along, there's no issues. We can, outsource just that one if there's not a need to control. Kind of how, we try to do it is pick and choose.
Would you ever have the ability to call up, like, Dunwoody's a bad example, it's a different county, but would you be able to say, hey, Dunwoody Police, you guys want to partner up?
Oh, absolutely.
And kind of
There's
form an
actually
alliance?
nothing to prevent us from going to Dunwoody and say, we want an intergovernmental agreement with you. And you, double the size of your department.
And put a
then we
precinct
have yes.
in Peachtree
There's
Corners.
actually
Yes.
nothing that prevents it. That would be kind of confusing.
Maybe a little strange, but
yeah, although if they
You
did.
see all the other city cops riding around like, what are they doing here?
Why is Dunwoody
Right.
near my house? What's
Yeah,
that?
I mean, that would be a little bit, whereas here, at least you're like, all right, we're in Gwinnett. So
we're close
it
to
still stands
Norcross.
to reason.
Like Norcross is kind
Norcross,
of easy.
yeah. I mean, for those who would know, like, wait a second, why is Norcross?
Yeah.
Because theoretically, unless, what's the term? If you're in
Jurisdiction.
pursuit of an active crime that originated in your jurisdiction, you can
Go into the
pursue
next.
across jurisdictional lines, but you can't initiate it. A Norcross police officer can't be rolling through Peachtree Corners and see somebody like speeding, and they're like,
Got him.
they don't have the jurisdiction. Now, I think there's some exceptions for maybe certain levels of felonies, like the commission of somebody shooting a gun or whatever they could. But anyway, that would be odd. But theoretically, you just explore options, and you guys are no different. You have stakeholders, and stakeholders have expectations. Sometimes stakeholders' expectations may be anything from the most investment, return on investment with no exceptions. That's just all I care about in the short term. And others may be like, we want this to run smoothly for a long time, so we want you to be able to give us more assurances and more control. And you guys have to, so we're all working for some other constituency that drives our decisions.
And those decisions, I mean, in the real estate space, they're typically impacting, for us, it's taxes and insurance. And insurance, the rates of that are just a byproduct of how is the area you're in doing. If home values keep going up and up and up, well, insurance is going to go up because it got more expensive. But if crime goes up and up and up, insurance is going to go up to counter that, and probably at a much higher level than if values of your home or your property or whatever the asset is go up. So when you think about like making decisions as a city, like from a real estate investor, like, okay, if there's better policing and it's going to be safer, and it's like you can see the metrics of what that was. You said, 80% of their time is spent in a different part of the city, but you're still paying for it. If you pay for it and you get 100% of their time, in theory, should be some increment of more efficient, and therefore insurance rates should benefit because of that. You look at that like those outside impacts, or is that coming from like the constituents and what they're telling the city council members of like, hey, this is what we want to see?
No, I mean, we look at outside, considerations as well. I mean, pivoting from police, there are two other areas that knowing that insurance, whether it's commercial, homeowner, whatever, insurance is expensive, but it's necessary. Insurance, bases their rates on a lot of different things, but there are two areas that we can actually help, drive insurance rates down. One is through, and these are Similar, most people know this as the ISO rating of a fire department. The Insurance Services Organization started by rating fire departments. And the better the fire department was, the more the insurance company felt comfortable that the rates could be a little bit lower because they felt comfortable that the fire department could get there faster. Water pressure, volume was good. I mean, they felt reasonably sure that an asset wasn't going to burn down to the ground if there was a fire. So the better the rating, the more it goes out. Well, we don't, Gwinnett has a county-wide fire department. So no cities in Gwinnett have their own fire department. So we're no different. But we do it in two other areas. One is it's a community rating system for stormwater, for drainage. So flood insurance is lower here because of our rating, and that's based on our stormwater infrastructure, how often we're making repairs, doing reviews or whatever. And the other one is, it's called BSEGS, is Building Code Effectiveness Grading System. And it rates how well our building department is inspecting buildings when they're being built or renovated. And the more they're on top of things to ensure that electrical, plumbing, structural are all done properly, means that they feel more confident that the building's going to wear better, into the future. That also drives insurance down. Now, I don't know. I can't, because insurance is different. I don't know exactly how much, but there is
that's going into their algorithm. They've got a national.
It is, and we recognize that as a community, we're only as good as a collection of all of our different segments. Our homes, our schools, our entertainment, restaurants, retail, and the commercial space that we have here. And of course, of all of those commercial, assets are. Right now, there's the office space. It's not in the same demand that it was, pre-COVID. And, we want to make sure that all the different, sectors here we've done everything we can to help our community be a healthy, well-rounded community. And every little bit counts. And, so we'll do every little bit we can.
Yeah.
The rest is up to you.
But it's good when we go out trying to say, where can we invest money into things? It's we have to consider how is that going to be administered and how is that going to work in the area we're investing to make sure they are doing that kind of stuff. Because if it's not, and that's way on the back burner, and it's sometimes we get into unincorporated sections of counties, and typically the inspections are known to be easier, less in depth, more like it's
Rubber
good.
stamp.
Let's go, get it going. It's but then the downside risk of that is all your costs are going to end up being higher in the long. It's a little bit easier up front, but then harder long term.
Because the insurance knows.
Yeah, they see all that information. We're running into that on the insurance front where we have areas that, you can't even really get the insurance that you used to even be able to get. Not only is the pricing higher, but what was there is no longer there. And Florida's got this issue where 20% of the homeowners there can't even get insurance, period. And it's just a buildup of how this stuff works.
It was hard enough before, just
Yeah.
makes it even harder now.
I got a duplex in Melbourne, Florida, if you'd like to buy it from me. And
He's no.
Property taxes and insurance are pretty much killing me.
Too.
Yeah.
Don't vote for good measure. Well, at least it's not
No
parts
trailer,
of Southern
just the
California. That's all.
At least the property's worth a lot of money in California. Your
That's
rent.
true.
Yeah. Florida's, it's worth money, but not like the California dollars.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, so Peachtree Corner's been in the city for 13 years, right? So you said you got 32 people that are on the team there. So you basically got a pretty new entity that's growing and with people. How do you look at attracting and getting the best people into your team versus other cities or other forms of government? Or why is hey, you should come work for a city versus working for a county
or private sector?
And what are some of the things the city's doing to attract those people? tell us about Curiosity Labs, about Georgia Tech. Give us some background, kind of, because that is not only attracting people to come here, to move here, but it's also attracting people who want to come work for you.
Well, that's true. It is both. So, I'll start with that. So, you mentioned Curiosity Lab. So about, it's probably about 7 years ago, we started taking a look, it was about our 5-year mark as a city, and we wanted to take a hard look at economic development in the city. For cities, activity is our kind of currency. It's what makes cities' reputations, differ. There's good activity, there's bad activity like criminal activity, but what we try to do is you try to have a well-rounded amount of healthy activity, good, commercial and business commerce, healthy office locations, retail, entertainment options, a diversity of housing options, all of it. Well, what do we, when we are, as a city, we have a product, that's our product we're selling. We're trying to sell our community. And there's a lot of other great communities out there, cities that have good products, that are doing great things, that have all that stuff. So we were looking at what do we say, what can we prove that separates us from those? Because most cities will tell you that they're a great place to live, work, learn, and play.
No one's like, this is the worst.
Right, exactly.
I live in the worst city ever.
And some of them may look and hear cities say that and be like, whatever. But there's a tier in which all those cities could say it. And, I could mention a bunch of cities in, Metro Atlanta, and all of them would, in your mind, be in that same band of quality. I'd live there if, things were. And so it's competitive in that. And so we were like, how do we separate ourselves? Well, we ultimately came down to the fact that we had something that there's not many cities in Georgia have, and we happen to have been the location of the first. That is, we're the location that the state of Georgia's very first technology and research office park was built. So in the late 60s, Georgia Tech graduate named Paul Duke, who was a developer, he was looking to do something about, at the time, was a brain drain of Georgia Tech graduates having to leave Metro Atlanta because there weren't enough technology jobs for them to stay here. And he happened to go up and see the Research Triangle Park of North Carolina. They were kind of creating that, and it was the theory was build an office park and have all of the occupants of all the commercial office space to be in the same sector, like biomedical or, some other area, and all of the different companies were in that, and it created kind of a synergy. So he decided to come back here and try the same thing out in Georgia around technology companies. And so he came way the hell out here, which is 20 miles from downtown, but at the time in the late 60s, it would have been way out here, and started purchasing property along, what was a 2-lane State Route 141, Peachtree Parkway, and ultimately created Technology Park Atlanta. So Tech Park Atlanta, he started, speculatively constructing office buildings and only filling them with tech companies. And it started to take off. And then people wanted to live close to where they work. So the office market started taking off. So since that time, our community was growing about equally. In fact, now we're about 50,000 people. We also have about 50,000 jobs. And kind of they grew together. Well, Tech Park Atlanta over the years did well. It's now over 500 acres. It's got more than 10,000 people working at companies inside of Tech Park. And, even as we sit here, you're just outside of the boundary of Tech Park on this side and of 141. And so we knew we had something unique. There are some other technology parks in Georgia now, but we still have the original one. It's actually where the modem was invented here. I mean, the
pretty cool.
precursor
I didn't
to
know that,
the
yeah.
internet was here in this office park, 2 miles from where we sit. Color printer was invented in Tech Park, Atlanta. And Scientific Atlanta, which is now part of Cisco, was actually founded and grew here. So it grew over the years, but all that's well and good, except we were like, what can we do with this unique asset in our city? And we started really looking at technology and what was going on, and we started looking at the evolution of technology. We noticed that it kind of evolved. This is oversimplification, but it evolved in like kind of the crawl, walk, run. The crawl was some new tech idea came to somebody's mind or some group, and you created something and you start testing it in a controlled environment. No variables, just does that tech work? And for the technology that does pass that level, the next level is you've got to inject variables into the equation. Does it work when you don't control every little thing? Well, another way of saying you don't control every other thing is saying you introduce it to the public. And so to do that, you need public space. And in some cases, the technology, if you're testing it in public space, you can't test it in a really condensed urban environment. It's too, complicated, unsafe potentially. So we were like, if somebody wants to have tech that, passes that closed, controlled, environment and ultimately wants to get to say, downtown Atlanta, where would that intermediate step, where would that walk phase of crawl, walk, run be? We were like, we have right-of-way that's inside of this technology park. The roads that connect all these buildings and a couple that run there are roads. We control it. Maybe we throw a bunch of toys into this sandbox and tell people to come, and we did, and put in some infrastructure and told the world, come use our right-of-way, test, demonstrate, anything from smart city, IoT, mobility, public safety, and we don't charge to use it. We don't require intellectual property of anything invented or created here, and everyone's like, you'll let us do it. And so it started setting us apart, and it started attracting companies to come here, started attracting people to want to see our community for the first time, and our goal was to land permanent companies that are looking to expand or,
But
relocate.
seeing that as an asset. They're seeing that as an asset. while they can do it.
And, but we'll take somebody who's only here for one day, because even if we have people in Metro Atlanta who are here for one day to just see it or test something or have meetings, but you know what happens at noon? They get hungry. You know where they're going to eat?
The
In
forum.
our restaurants.
Yes.
And so then we get sales tax from that, something they would have never been here. The other end of that spectrum, we land somebody, now you have permanent. And I'll tell you that we went through a couple of years of conversations with a certain company that builds robotic-assisted surgical systems, the Da Vinci system, based in California, wanted to build an East Coast headquarters, $600 million medical campus, 1,500 jobs, 30,000 overnight hotel room stays per year. They did a site selection search on the Eastern Seaboard and ultimately came down to Peachtree Corners and Durham, North Carolina, in Research Triangle. And a lot of factors involved. Both states were involved, both counties were involved, both cities were involved. But the person, their chief operating officer that headed that thing, said that they could have flipped a coin and gone either way. Ultimately came here because of the ecosystem we had at Curiosity Lab and the partners we had at it. So that intuitive surgical Goliath that we have right here, Curiosity Lab had a role in attracting them. And that was, not potentially a once in a generation, but I'm just saying that's why we created it. That's why it's doing, and we've been the world's first in a lot of testing of some pretty like weird and also impressive tech that's out there. And it attracts companies, it attracts visitors, it attracts employees. And, so it's it's what sets us apart from other cities that are doing great things in their own right, but they don't have an ecosystem like this.
Yeah.
So that's the Curiosity Lab story.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's like, but all those interconnected pieces are why it's like you have to know on our standpoint, like a real estate side, you got to know where you're going because you see that kind of stuff happening in that story. It's like, this makes sense. Should be involved here. It's like, that's where everything's happening.
And again, also, we're only as good as a collection of all of the efforts. We're only as good as the commercial, office and real estate, portfolio this city has. Only as good as the homes, of different types. Only as good as the shopping. It's all a collection together. And we have work to do. You're never done. You're always looking to improve, but we caught a little bit of a lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, and I think your footprint, from what I remember, is also a little bit bigger than other cities. As far as if you compare it to like Dunwoody or Brookhaven or Chamblee, your footprint's a little bit bigger.
I mean, I don't know what Dunwoody's is. I mean, Dunwoody is pretty close to our size, a little bit bigger. I think Dunwoody last night, what was the 2020 census, like 60,000?
I think it was 50 something.
Okay, was it 50?
Yeah,
Maybe I'm seeing
but geography.
Yeah, but I think we're 18 square miles
Okay.
of a community. So I don't know what Dunwoody is, but
Well, you look at, so
certainly
attracting
we're
jobs.
bigger than Chamblee,
Yeah.
or, Doraville or Norcross or those.
So Intuitive, they bring 1,500 people. There's always this. I feel like it's always been in the news of like what is the affordability crisis in housing and how do you just solve it instantaneously? But then you've got zoning. No one wants apartments next to their single family home. And do they want townhomes? What are the schools going to do? All these other parts that kind of tie into it. There's no actually good answer for how do you do any of that other than how do you make communities that people want to be in?
Yeah, we've had this conversation multiple times, but like new affordable housing is an oxymoron. It doesn't, you don't build new affordable housing. Affordable housing happens after it ages. You don't build it, or it's very hard to build because otherwise, if you build it, you're paying for a little bit of it. Some municipality, some county authority is paying for part of it.
You look at it competitively, though. Your brother moved to a new house in Texas. It was affordable.
Yeah, Lennar built it. Entry price for a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, I think it was like $220.
And outside, outside
like
the
how
city
far
function,
outside
how
of
far
where's the
outside?
nearest?
It was probably 30 miles north of Dallas.
Right.
City
Well, that's
limits.
actually not that far.
Yeah, no, it's not. Yeah.
They have teleport. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Teleport.
Texas doesn't have the barriers that we have. They don't have the topography. They don't have the rivers like we do. It's a little bit different. They have a lot more sprawl. But
That's
still,
true.
they're building affordable homes.
Well, you look at any city. It's like how does the city make sure that it can still grow and have all this great stuff happening, but then also be affordable across the board? Because you need not only older people, but you need younger people to be able to come into that city and move there and start their family there and stay there.
And you need undeveloped land, and you don't have any undeveloped land.
Or redevelop
Not
land.
much left. Yeah, not much
Well,
left.
when you redevelop land, the housing is no longer affordable because you already have a basis in
What
that
about
land.
Lake Greenleaf over there? You can develop that.
Lake Greenleaf. Can we fill that in? Can we get a permit for that?
Well, you can get a permit to fill in the ocean if you have enough money to ultimately do it. I mean, it costs.
You can put houseboats on it.
We could Airbnb. You have an Airbnb issue?
Some of
Can we
those
do that?
Oh, we don't allow rentals for anything less than
There's
30
no
days.
Airbnb.
There goes that idea.
Well, I mean, you can't ban Airbnb, but we have a prohibition against rentals for less than 30 days.
Okay, so,
So that
That's
in
yeah.
effect keeps Vrbo and Airbnb from operating
Yeah.
in a community like this. There's, if we were, say, Savannah, where people want to go
There's so
and
much of that,
visit
yeah.
it for that, the tourism is high. That would be a different, but we have no reason to,
To be
for anybody
needing
to
that,
be renting. I mean, we're certainly mostly a business community. Our hotel room nights between Sunday and Thursday, our occupancy is pretty high in the hotels, and then Friday and Saturday it's nothing because there's no reason.
It's a business crowd.
Yeah, it's a business crowd. We have a couple of recreational areas that have some, weekend tournament stuff that you can have. Pinckneyville Park can have big baseball tournaments, but beyond that, no. I mean, look, I will tell you the housing. I mean, really all uses. Zoning is one of the most contended issues that a city deals with because you're dealing with something that's it has an effect on what is oftentimes the largest investment people have, and that's their home. And so soon as somebody thinks that you're doing something that might affect their home value, they will lose their mind.
Well, we had a great conversation with you about this building and the different uses of it because it has a variety of uses. It was great. Number one, it was great that we were able to have a conversation about it. And number two, you guys gave us good advice saying like, hey, current zoning is office institutional, meaning that it kind of is what it is, meaning that like you can't get this flexible roll up door concept in here. But if you just go for a rezone to M1, as you suggested, it opens up the door to a lot of uses, and council can hear the neighbors, and we can talk about it as a community. And ultimately that's what we did. There wasn't really any pushback, and it was actually a very efficient process.
Well, but remember that scenario requires two things. One, you both acquired the asset and came in with creative ideas, stuff you wanted to throw against the wall to see. So you didn't just come in and be like, I don't know what to do with this, or I only want to do this one thing. So it takes, property owners here to have an open mind like you did, which is, the market better than we do. You're in it. You came in with some, creative ideas. Some didn't work, some did, but we have to have that on one. You have to have that on one side. And our hope is on the other side, you felt like, all right, the city recognizes that, it's a tough time to be in commercial, real estate, office especially. This was built to be commercial office. We don't want it to be vacant. We want it to be healthy. The more activity you have around here, the better we are as well. I mean, we're your biggest fans to make money on this and to have healthy activity. And so, if we were just like, no, says here, the code says you can't do that. Well, then we're going to have a lot more office vacancy than we would like. So it takes both. You got to have, property owners who either have investments and they're willing to be open and creative or are acquiring it. And then we've got to be flexible. And in this case, we actually created a zoning category because we talked through and came up with an idea that we were like, this might be something that some other, office, locations could stand to do. And maybe this is something we want to be a tool we want to be able to propose. So yes, that is how it should work. But again, we could be as open-minded as anybody if we don't have people willing to, do what you do, invest in the community, be creative, open, think outside the box, because it's outside the box time of thinking right now. We have to have both. Right. And we married those up. And here we sit, and it's great space. And, you've turned this space back into a real asset that the city can be proud of, not to say it was, horrible to begin with, but it certainly was, call it unremarkable.
Yeah. Right.
And you've made it remarkable.
Right.
And
when you think about like a city being able to do that and have that interaction with people that want to do business with them, at some point, you were mentioning, politicians, you have more and more and more people. It's almost makes that harder and harder to do. So there's some like limiting scale of return as the city gets too big.
You do in a lot of areas. I mean, here we fight a crowd that is very anti-rental. And it's anti-rental because, talk about you need people of all generational age, I guess. But as people get older, they get more resistant to change, and they also get more civically active. So, if you're an elected official, you got to be real careful about, really, irritating the crowd that votes in larger numbers than other age brackets.
NIMBYs.
I see you're looking at him pretty heavily here.
But we have a large segment of the single family detached homeownership here in the city. And with the Chattahoochee River coming through, we have this real large oasis of detached homes of people who moved here. If I had a nickel for every time somebody said something like, yeah, when I bought my house in, 2001 or 95 or whatever, it was, this area looked different and I don't like this change. But they vote and they don't want change, and they certainly don't want people who rent, because they're like, people who rent don't take care of their asset as well as people who own.
Yeah.
And it's a generalization that's probably has some truth to it, but healthy communities have housing types of all, different equity, rental, dense, more, sparse. And we do have some locations, around Town Center Forum, for instance, that would be healthier if it had on-site residential.
Yeah, there's also the conversation about if there's workforce, because if you have only single-family, high-priced houses, your workforce is coming in.
There won't be any
Commuting.
It's commuting.
Commuting to the traffic. They don't have ownership in the community because they don't live here.
Right.
And we struggle with that a little bit. Now, here we're lucky in that at least we do have a few of the neighboring municipalities, not named Dunwoody, that have...
What are you saying? Dunwoody doesn't have a workforce?
No. But that have a decent amount of, housing.
For all
income types. But still nice to, you need to have a good, healthy mix. And, but going back to when the community can speak in a pretty strong, unified voice, it gets elected officials to, gives them pause. And, so we probably don't have as much rental in the city as we should, maybe in specific areas, more in particular. And workforce, even equity. We've been working hard on trying to figure out ways the city would have to be involved to put our finger on the scale of having new housing constructed that its price point is a little more affordable.
But it's still got to meet all the demands so that we don't.
It does, and of course, affordability. The definition of that depends on who you're talking to, but we're going to have to potentially squeeze square footage. That's
right.
One way. The city our redevelopment authority is looking at potentially acquiring property and then selling it to a developer willing to build a certain
Stack
housing
condos,
stock for
right.
the property is sold for like $1 in return for a price point of new housing. That makes it to where the developer can make the numbers work because they didn't have to acquire the property.
Well, Dunwoody has a huge problem with age or 55 and over. So there's
aging population.
There's no place for 55 and over who wants to move to a low maintenance high rise.
Yeah, the empty nester.
The options are very limited.
We do too. I mean, again, Dunwoody's a good example of a city going through really a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah.
We share a border. We're both in North Metro Atlanta. I mean, it's we're struggling with the same thing. If there was a magic bullet or elixir that you could do.
So if Dunwoody wants
Toll
to
road?
come into Peachtree Corners, they got to do a toll gate.
A toll road on 141, can we do that?
You could put it up in the north to prevent all the Forsyth
There you go.
County people, that would help us.
Oh, you want the Dunwoody people to come to you. Well, you want to see
Well,
your
that's
restaurants.
an east-west type of
There, you
thing.
want height. You want
Yeah, our issue is more. I mean, same as yours.
141
It's
is-
the northern,
Right.
flight. As people keep pushing farther and farther north to get more property for a dollar amount, they only have so many ways to come back into Atlanta. 141 is
one of those
big one.
Wait, so that's a good question. So you have control over whether 141 turns into like a 7-lane highway with no stoplights, or
There's only two roads that are not city streets that we do not control. It's State Route 140 and State Route 141. So that would be Peachtree Parkway. Well, Peachtree Industrial Boulevard.
The split.
Actually,
Yeah.
let me back up. It's actually now Peachtree Boulevard.
Yep, they
Just
did
Peachtree
rebrand it,
Boulevard
yeah.
up until the split.
Right.
Then if you stay to the east or the right as you head north, then it becomes Peachtree Industrial Boulevard again as it moves north into Gwinnett.
Right.
If you stay on the left, it's still 141 on the left, but now that's Peachtree Parkway. But yeah, 141 from 285 on up, that's State Route, and then Holcomb Bridge Road, State Route 140. Those two, the state of Georgia
so they control the
controls. They
stoplights.
can
They can do.
whatever
Yeah,
they want.
We talked about this before, and I forgot what the answer was. But essentially, you have thousands of people coming into Peachtree Corners every day who are residents for about 15 minutes, maybe. Thousands.
We have a lot of commute. I mean, Peachtree Parkway has 65,000 cars on it every day.
So you got 65,000 people driving through your community, using your community for about 15 minutes.
I mean,
every
not
day.
all of those. I mean, I use it to
Right,
get from
right,
my house.
right.
I mean, so there are local, but yes, there's a
But you
large
gotta work with the
percentage
state.
that was.
Figure out like,
Oh.
hey, how do we maintain this road? Because we got cross points and
Police
stoplights
and ambulance and fire, because Gwinnett County has to service that if there's problems for accidents. So right now, you don't have to pay for if an ambulance service or a police service or fire service. You're not paying for that on Peachtree Industrial or Peachtree Parkway.
No, I mean, you still, in this case, still paying for it. Our residents are still paying to the county a millage
Right,
rate
your
for
residents.
all of.
You're not writing a check, though.
No, we're not writing a check.
Right.
And I've had it set up that way in previous cities I've managed where you're contracting with, like an ambulance service,
Right.
or I've had it in-house as part of the fire department. I mean, you've got to get revenue for it one way or the other, and it's got to get paid for one way or the other. There are different, just depends on the community and what resources there are out there. On state route, or both state routes, Georgia State Patrol also has jurisdiction. I guess theoretically, GSP has jurisdiction everywhere, but specifically roadway where they're really working it, they'll do it as well. So we'll see them out there every now and then. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you win some where we've got a state waterway, the Chattahoochee, going
Right.
through the city. Good.
All right.
Sometimes
Peachtree
state routes,
Industrial.
yeah. Sometimes the state routes not so good.
Got it.
So
So you,
yeah.
so you mentioned some of the previous cities that you worked for. One thing I saw in your profile was is it Sutter City?
Solder City.
Solder
Talking
City.
about it in Iraq. Yep.
So why don't you tell us about that city a little bit?
Well, so
That was the first city that you kind of stood up or kind of were an executive in and worked in when you were in infantry.
yeah. So I was part of the invasion of Iraq in 2002. And I was an infantry officer. I was part of 3rd Infantry Division. And so, the invasion happens. We ultimately end up in Baghdad. So the division, it was based out of Fort Benning and Fort Stewart, had units at both, but took the city. And can you imagine? It would almost be like, we moved into Metro Atlanta. And so now, as we were getting closer, we'd be no different. We had an army that was bearing down on us. As it got close, we would have some decisions to make as civilians, if you will. You either can flee, especially if you think that this army, as their government was saying, was going to, rape women and kill children and all that kind of stuff. So everybody's scared. So you have one of two options. You can either flee, cases people have no money, like where do I go to? How do I, or you just hunker down in place. What you're not doing is you're not like getting up the morning after this army takes the city and saying, I'm going to go back to my job at the wastewater treatment plant. Or, I'm going to go out and continue to, we're going to continue paving that road, where the tanks are sitting after they just got into you're going to be like, ugh. Well, when that happens, basic services start to break down. And, cities especially it's called the government of last resort, because it's the government that really is providing the service that you really actually tangibly need it, and it can touch and feel. You get up in the morning, you turn the light on. That's usually a utility provider that has, local, a lot of local governments have their own utilities. You turn the water on, flush the toilet, shower. You expect water to be clean or the water to go down the drain. You drive out of your, house, and you expect the streets to be paved well. Right. There's no criminal gunfire as you expect it to be safe. I mean, it's real. And when that stops, you'd be surprised that all of a sudden, how things will pile up. For instance, the first thing was trash wasn't getting collected. And so now people were still generating trash, and they're just putting out there, and it just starts piling up. There's no police officers. There's no whatever. And so when that happens, the command structure has to break it up into small pieces and assign it. Well, lucky me, as an infantry officer, my unit, I was given responsibility to manage a really nasty area of Baghdad where the Sunnis and the Shias, their little fiefdoms came together. So it was a rough place.
That was your spot?
And they said, yep, Captain Johnson, congratulations. Your job is to stand that local government back up. Get all of the Iraqis that were in the service sectors back. Have your guys be the police for a while to prevent, there just being a complete breakdown of law and order. The hospitals over there are owned by the government, so get the medical staff back, get the wastewater treatment plant running, get trash getting collected. And so I had to do that. And I actually enjoyed that feeling. I had never been, my only career so far had been in the military. So I had never, experienced it. And it was really cool to be involved in getting services back somebody. And it wasn't that indirect service like, hey guys, congratulations. I just got the health department stood back up. And you're like, great. I don't remember the last time I used the health department, but okay.
Yeah.
Type of thing. It's real. Like, hey, your water's back on. Like, oh,
sweet.
Awesome. Yeah. Sweet. Yeah, exactly. And it was kind of cool to be a part of that. And then I got to stand it back up. I got to see how it worked. It's called civil affairs in the military. In fact, there's an actual branch of the Army that is specifically set up for this. And at some point, after I'd probably been doing it for 6 months, I handed the baton off to a civil affairs officer who continued to do it. Well, fast forward to years later when I retired, and I was thinking, what career am I going to get into if, I'm not saying the military. That kept coming back up. And so my old man, I didn't even know city manager position existed.
Was something
I didn't even, and I told my old man once, when he was asking, so what do you want to do? And we were talking about it. He was like, he was like, you should run a city. I'm like, I don't want to run for office, be a mayor, thinking strong mayor, form of government. He was like, no, fool. More cities are run by council manager forms and so the mayor is not the one who has to do all that. There's a position for it. I was like, cool, researched it and, saw that Master's in Public Administration was the pretty typical, and went back to old UGA and got my master's and became a city manager. So, that's kind of how I backed into.
That's pretty cool.
Did not ever, didn't know at the time, didn't know at the time I would be potentially doing something like that and didn't know the profession even existed. But, it was, it's certainly different, completely different context, but there are similarities between, either adjusting services, creating new services, fixing problems with service delivery that is still really rewarding because, again, it's those services that people really notice.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the cool part. And there's no politics. Potholes, don't care if you're liberal,
No one's in favor of them?
conservative, Republican, Democrat. They just
It's a
want it
pothole.
fixed.
Pothole's
So-
a pothole. Right.
yeah,
Right,
so
right.
the elected city council I work for, there's no partisanship. We don't get into policy debates about whether or not, there should be, public broadcasting, the PBS or just, we don't get into those kind of debates because we don't need to.
No. How many cities have you worked at?
It's my third.
What do you do with the old swag from the other 2 cities? Do you have to throw it out? You still wear the old city shirts? You gotta throw
No,
'em out,
I don't
right?
wear the old city shirts. That would almost be like you get traded from the Falcons to the
you gotta retire.
Buccaneers, and you're still going around town with your Falcons gear on. I mean,
Were you always
Yeah,
city
no.
manager?
I have been.
Yeah.
That's the only civilian job I've ever
Were they
had.
bigger or small? Like, how do you look at like the size of it?
They've always been a little bit smaller because that's the only technically way I can get promoted is to go to a
Bigger city.
To just go to bigger city.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's no other position. So started out as in a suburb of Savannah, Garden City, Georgia. It's actually where the Port of Savannah is actually located. It's not in Savannah. It's actually in the city.
Is
of
the
Garden City.
port in that city?
Oh yeah,
Oh, interesting.
that was an interesting
But the
city.
city operate the port. That's more of a federal.
No,
port.
it's state.
Yeah. Oh, it's state.
Georgia
okay.
Ports Authority is
Georgia-
the state
okay.
of port authority.
All right.
But it is
Yeah.
the largest contiguous port facility. Like one single is all in. Fascinating story about how that came about too. But yeah, a massive, Goliath of an operation in that city, and it consumed so much of how the city operated
Oh,
and
I
its
bet, yeah.
residents. And then I went there, and I was city manager of Anniston, Alabama, and went there because it was time for me to go to a bigger city. So that was bigger than Garden City, but they had also just been delivered 40,000 acres of what had been the active duty military Army base of Fort McClellan.
That's where the gun depot
The
is.
CMA is there.
Oh,
Civilian
yeah.
Marksman
Absolutely.
Association.
Yeah.
That's
Yes, so been involved in that. But yeah, so Fort McClellan was given to the city, and they wanted somebody who had.
Wow.
So
It's
I
like,
went
is
there.
it a good thing or a bad
Yeah.
thing? It's like,
Both.
yeah,
Yeah.
Absolutely
great,
both.
But
Yeah.
And so I was there, and then when it was time for me to really go to a bigger one, it came here. So
Very cool.
We're glad to have you here.
Yeah. So thanks for
Thank
coming.
yeah, I mean, thanks for having me. I mean, and thanks for what you guys do. I mean, again, Peachtree Corners is only as good as the people who own property, manage property, live in property. That's an important part of what makes our city healthy. And so, anything we can do to help you guys, but love what you're doing here. It's looked at very favorably by the community. Seeing some of, this for the first time, we're going to be very proud to let people know, what you've done here. So,
And we love show and tell, so bring anyone by.
yeah,
What-
and, again, and
yeah.
also, this is the kind of stuff where I get a lot of developers and property owners who will just, cold call me or just send an email, hey, I want to talk to you about something else. And there are some that when you have a history with them and you're like, here we go again. They've never, and there are some that, again, come into it with an open mind, work through that process. And then once you get permission, you come in and you deliver by doing it right. And so those are rare. So anytime you guys ever want to throw some more stuff.
Well, we're going to submit
Some
that.
random ideas.
We're going to do the permit to fill in Lake Greenleaf, right? We're going to do that.
I'm telling
gonna
you,
put
with
pontoon
enough
boats.
money, you can get anything filled if you have enough
It'll be
money.
the first boating lake in Peachtree Corners.
Or the houseboat, VRB.
VRBOs.
VRBOs. the
Affordable
houseboats.
housing on the houseboats out back here.
All right.
I mean, you could potentially get away with it if it was fed by a natural water source. It would be considered waters of the state.
A hose, maybe? A hose with
And
water?
I don't
like
think so.
No?
And,
Okay.
and then you could end up having it anchored right in the middle and say that it's,
All
like
right.
they do in
We've got
Biloxi.
some thinking to do,
Yeah.
guys. So
We'll get back to it, though.
Yeah, we'll get
Lots of ideas.
Yeah, we'll draw some pictures.
Well, keep up the good work. So thanks for having
Yeah.
me.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for
Appreciate it
coming.
very much. If you want to see other interviews we've talked a lot with different mayors around Georgia specifically about what it's like running and operating different cities of all different sizes. And Brian, thank you for telling us about your experience with the city manager role. Very cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yep.